Hello, I'm Dr. Kristen Vaughn, and welcome to my second video for Hello Panic. In this video, I'll walk through the infographic Panic Attack Survival Guide. But if you watched my first video, there were some very important concepts that I'll also touch on in this video, so you may want to go back and watch it if you haven't watched it yet. As you might recall, down here, we had some important variables that contribute to panic attacks and can also maintain them. These variables, such as your past events in your life, your genetics, are things that you really can't do anything about, right? They already happened, so not really in your control. However, up here, I covered some important factors that can be in your control, and that's what I'm going to talk about in more depth today. So if you did watch the video, you might recall those would be your actions, your thoughts, your emotions, and your beliefs. So for the second infographic, today I'll cover actions, thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, what role they play in the panic attacks, both before, during, and after. But before I do that, I want to cover two key concepts that will be at the core of Hello Panic. As you see here, we have noticing and accepting. So I'll touch on what those are, but as you see, as I cover the rest of this infographic today, you'll see elements of noticing and accepting throughout. So first we have noticing. It's a simple concept. It simply means being aware of what is happening as it's happening. Now we can notice anything, but for Hello Panic, we want to start to notice things such as our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions, and our behaviors, and even our beliefs. Okay, so what you're going to see is that a lot of the things that contribute to panic attacks are outside of our awareness. They also happen very quickly and automatically. So with the practice of noticing, we're going to bring these things up into our awareness so we can really see them more clearly. And then when we see them more clearly, we're going to have a little bit more room to do something different with them. Okay, so our second concept here is accepting. Again, pretty simple concept, but it's equally as important as noticing. So accepting means being with something in an open, non-judgmental attitude. Okay, this often has to do with things that we don't like. Can we be a little more open and accepting of things that we don't like? Now, anxiety is one of those things that we can work towards accepting. We don't like anxiety because it's uncomfortable, but if we're practicing accepting, we can say something like, "Oh, I don't really like you, but I can learn to let you be there." Okay, so again, noticing and accepting, two key concepts that are going to be covered throughout Hello Panic, and they're going to be essential from getting you to the point where you can loosen the grip of panic in your life. So now let's talk about actions before the panic attack. By actions, I simply mean things that we do. So first I want to talk about self-care. We want to add more activities or actions that are going to support us and be healthy for us. So we know what those are, generally speaking, right? Getting enough sleep, getting exercise, eating right. Those are all things that we know are good. However, we don't really always do them as much as we might want to. We also want to minimize actions that are going to be unhealthy for us, and that's, well, we can just start with the opposite of all the healthy actions would be the unhealthy actions, but also just engaging in activities that we know aren't going to support us and helping us to deal with stress. So one way of looking at actions is to talk about self-care. Another point about actions would be the amount of activity that we have in our lives. And what we want to look towards is a balance in our activities. We don't want to be so busy that we don't have time to stop and to breathe. And we don't want to do enough that we're not really engaging ourselves in things that are meaningful. So again, you want to look for this balance in the level of activity. And finally, I'm going to make a quick point here about avoiding activities. We want to be careful not to avoid activities because they make us feel anxious. I'm going to go into this in more detail later, but in the meantime, just keep that in mind. We just want to be careful not to avoid things just because they make us anxious. So thoughts. Thoughts are so important when it comes to anxiety and panic attacks. But one thing about thoughts is we can't prevent ourselves from having them. And we definitely can't prevent ourselves from having thoughts that are unwanted. But what we can do is we can learn to respond to our thoughts in a new way. So what we can do is we can practice reframing. And so by reframing, I mean thinking of things in a different way. Okay, so one thought that would produce anxiety would be, oh no, I'm feeling anxious. I might have a panic attack. That would be terrible. Okay, let's consider that thought. That thought is going to generate more anxiety. So we want to notice when we have thoughts like that. And again, we can't stop ourselves from having those thoughts, but we can reframe them. So we can try to see it in a different way, a way that would be more helpful and less likely to lead to anxiety. So for instance, with that particular thought, I might say something like, if I felt anxious, that would be okay. I could handle it. So that's a really good example of reframing. And that's something that you can practice in between panic attacks. So you might do some journaling where you're writing down a lot of the thoughts that you're having that you think might be causing you to be more anxious, and practicing reframing while you're doing the journaling. So I'm going to put journaling back up here, because journaling is another action that you can do that's going to help you be prepared for that next panic attack should it come. And so with the thoughts, again, we can't prevent them. We can't stop ourselves from having anxiety-producing thoughts, but we can practice reframing. As I mentioned in my first video, emotions are a big part of the panic picture, and that's because overwhelming emotions or unexpressed or unacknowledged emotions can trigger anxiety and panic attacks. So first, what we want to do with emotions is tune into them at regular intervals. Just as we can notice our thoughts, we can also notice our emotions. We will check in or tune in and sort of ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now? Okay, so we can also do that through the journaling. How have I been feeling today? What's going on there? But also what we can do is we can express our emotions in a healthy way. So we first want to see that they're there, and then we want to get them out in a way that's helpful. So for instance, yelling at someone wouldn't be a healthy way to express our anger, but we could write about our feelings. We could talk about our feelings with a trusted friend. We could use music or artwork. All of these things are healthy ways to express our emotions. So beliefs. Beliefs are important because they represent how we view ourselves, how we view our experience, how we view the world around us. And beliefs can play a central role in panic and anxiety. Often our beliefs are hurting us because they tell us that there's something wrong with feeling anxious. An example of an unhealthy belief is, anxiety makes me weak. It makes me a weak person. That is actually going to make you feel worse. It's not going to help with your anxiety at all. But if we can become more aware of the beliefs that we have about anxiety, we can learn to shift them in a direction that would be much more beneficial. A beneficial and helpful belief about anxiety would be, anxiety is acceptable. Let's talk about what happens during the panic attack, because let's be honest, that's why most of you are here. You want to know what to do differently during the panic attack. You want it to stop. Remember, I was there. I've had panic attacks before, and I know just how awful they can be. What you want to be careful of during the panic attack is not to have the expectation that you can just stop it or shut it off. I'm so sorry to tell you that. Believe me, I've been there. I wish there was an on-off switch for panic attacks, and there just isn't. But you're going to do much better if you realize that you can't just turn it off. Don't have that expectation. However, what you can do is prevent yourself from getting pulled into the panic feedback loop. So if you watched my first video, you may recall what happens during a panic attack is illustrated here by the panic feedback loop. This is very critical. Understanding this is very important. It's going to help you to get better. What happens first is a symptom of anxiety emerges. For instance, you'll notice, maybe your heart is beating a little faster. Immediately, you pick that up and your thoughts go to, uh-oh, I'm feeling anxious. This could be bad. Well, when you say that to yourself, immediately your body's threat detection system is going to pump out those chemicals that cause your heart to beat faster, that cause your respiration to increase, that may give you a sense of being dizzy or lightheaded, and all those symptoms of a panic attack. And once that happens, well, guess what? Your thoughts and your reactions start to escalate. You are now in the panic feedback loop, and the panic attack is going to occur. Again, we can't shut it off. However, we can stay outside of this so that when the anxious feelings emerge, we don't engage in a way that's going to get us sucked in. So I'm going to walk through this with you and give you a better idea of what this is going to look like. Actions during the panic attack. You want to know, what do I do? What do I do to get this to stop? Well, I already went over that. Can't do that. Can't get it to stop. We got to stay outside of the panic feedback loop. There are some actions that are going to help you to do that, and I call these grounding techniques. Now, grounding techniques are actions that are going to keep your focus in the present moment through using your senses. Examples of grounding techniques would be just paying attention to the feel of your feet literally on the ground, going for a walk where you're focused on the actual feel of what it's like to be walking, putting some cold water on your face, drinking some cold water, touching something soft like a stuffed animal or a pet. So these are all things that you can do that will bring your focus to the present moment versus focusing on the thoughts about how bad this is or what's going to happen. So as you're practicing these techniques, you're going to notice that your thoughts are going to go back to the panic. But what you're going to do when you notice that, remember noticing, you're going to shift your focus back to the grounding techniques. You're going to get better at this. You're just going to keep practicing. Okay, grounding techniques. Oh, there go my thoughts. Grounding techniques. Again, with practice, this is going to just come more naturally to you. So that is an example of some actions that you can do during the panic attack. Thoughts during the panic attack. So as I mentioned before, with the panic feedback loop, thoughts play a critical role in the panic attack. So an example of a thought that's going to fuel the fire of our anxiety would be, oh no, I'm starting to feel anxious. This would be terrible. So what you may remember is that we want to practice reframing. It's kind of hard sometimes when you're feeling panicky to practice reframing. That's why you've done a lot of this work beforehand. You've practiced this before. So what you might want to do is write down some reframed thoughts and carry them with you so that during the panic attack you can pull out the list, whether it's on your phone or on a piece of paper, and rehearse those thoughts, okay? So instead of saying, oh no, I'm feeling anxious, this could be really horrible, we want to say something like, it's just my anxiety and it will soon pass. Of course, our emotional experience is going to be a very important part of what's happening during the panic attack. We're aware that we have this overwhelming emotion of anxiety, and we want desperately for it to stop. But what we know about emotions is we can't really control them in that way. And so what we want to do is just acknowledge that the anxiety is present. Instead of focusing on trying to stop feeling anxious, we want to practice allowing ourselves to feel anxious. I know that's strange, but you might remember when I talked about the two core concepts, I talked about noticing, paying attention to what's happening. So what's happening is I'm feeling anxious, and working towards acceptance. So acceptance is allowing something to be there even though we may not like it. Now this is something that's, again, going to be a challenge, and I will help you with this, but that's the goal. Just practicing being with, allowing ourselves to be anxious. And if we've done this before, if we practiced this before, we're going to have an easier time doing it during the panic attack, but it's going to be much more heightened, so it'll be a bit more of a challenge. Our beliefs are a little bit harder to work on during the panic attack because they do exist on a deeper level, but we can try working with our beliefs just by focusing on our surface level thoughts and reminding ourselves that while this is uncomfortable, while I'm kind of struggling with this here, it doesn't mean that there's something horribly wrong with me. It doesn't mean that I'm somehow flawed or defective, because buying into harmful beliefs like that is not going to help you at all. It's going to be damaging. So let's practice changing some of these beliefs for the better, so we start to see what's really more in line with reality, which is that lots of people experience anxiety and panic. It's part of our natural human existence. And while it is very unpleasant, it doesn't make us somehow deeply flawed. So now we're getting to the point where we're going to talk about after the panic attack. What I mean by after is the period just immediately following the panic attack and for the rest of the day. You may feel some relief at this point, but you also may be kind of having a reaction that's not very helpful because you're kind of beating yourself up. What happens after the panic attack is very important because it has to do with how you've processed what just happened. Now, how you process what just happened can either lead towards fewer panic attacks, less anxiety, or towards more panic attacks, more anxiety. So again, how we process what just happened after the panic attack and going on through the rest of your day is going to be very important. In terms of actions after the panic attack, I actually want you to try to go about your day. There's a misconception that after a panic attack, you should pull back and you should maybe just rest or not do anything for the rest of the day. That's understandable because you've really been through something difficult. This was hard on you, so you may be tired. However, pulling back on your activities is actually going to reinforce the problem of panic. When you decide not to do something because you've struggled with a panic attack, you're telling yourself, I can't deal with this. I can't handle this. I can't do the things that I usually do because of panic. The caveat here is that we don't want to do this in a harsh way. We don't want to say something like, come on, get back out there, you silly person, you, or something like that, right? We want to be gentle about it. We want to encourage ourselves because we know that it's better for us to do things, to keep going with our day, than to avoid things. So gently encourage yourself to go about the rest of your day. So when it comes to our thoughts after the panic attack, very important. You're probably going to be aware of having a lot of thoughts about what just happened. Those thoughts are likely to be characterized by worry. Worry about what it means that you've had another panic attack if you've had more than one. What does this mean for your life? What are going to be the things that you're going to have to pull back on or to change because of it, you may notice a lot of those thoughts. That's how your mind works. It likes to solve this problem. And so it's maybe almost like an overdrive trying to come up with ways to prevent this from happening again. We cannot stop having those thoughts, and we can't just force them to be different, but we can practice our reframing. So instead of saying something like, oh no, what if I had a panic attack in class? That would be horrible. We could say something like, ooh, while I'll be uncomfortable if I started to feel anxious in class, I'd be okay because it would be uncomfortable, but it would pass. So we want to work on our reframing, but sometimes reframing can be difficult. So if you're finding it difficult to really buy into some of these reframed thoughts, you can practice just noticing the thoughts and letting them go. This is going to be a skill that I'm going to cover in my Hello Panic program. It's a challenge, but you can get better at it, just noticing that the thoughts are there and letting them go. Emotions after the panic attack, like before and during the panic attack, our emotions after the panic attack are something that we want to be aware of. We may be feeling frustrated, we may be feeling angry, or even sad. We just want to notice that that's happening and practice accepting it. But we also might want to do something called evaluating our triggers. So triggers, this is a definition that I list here. Triggers can be a number of things like thoughts, people, places, or emotions, situations that are likely to increase our anxiety and can lead to panic. So we want to look at what happened and see if there was one of these things that might have made us feel more anxious. That could be something like, that's obvious, like a social situation. So if you have social anxiety, we know that maybe going to a party is going to trigger panic. But other times it's not as obvious. It could be something like, just say you had too much to drink the night before and you kind of have a hangover. That's actually a common trigger for panic. For women, it could be just fluctuations in your monthly cycle create more anxiety. Or it could be something like a certain situation reminds you of a difficult experience in your past. That can be a little bit harder to identify. But triggers are important because when we see that a trigger may be coming up, or we may be more likely to experience more anxiety because of a trigger, we can be prepared and we can use the tools and the skills that we've gained to help us to deal with that trigger in a better way. We've covered a lot today, so if you're still with me, thank you. Thank you for following along, and I hope you've learned a lot, which if you've been paying attention, you probably have. Finally, we're going to talk about beliefs after the panic attack. It's so important what's the meaning that you make of this panic experience. I've worked with a lot of people as a therapist, and I see so many times that the story or the meaning that is created about this panic experience is actually just harming the person. It's making them feel shamed, it's hurting their self-esteem, and it's affecting how they live their lives. So that is why beliefs actually are, more important and most important to talk about in terms of after the panic attack, because it has something to do with, again, the story. We're always creating a story about what our experiences mean. One belief that tends to be particularly harmful is the belief that having panic attacks means that I can't live a normal life. That's not true. Actually, we can live very normal lives with anxiety. So I want you to think about reframing this in terms of, I can go on with my life. I may feel anxious, I may have another panic attack, but I can live life as I had previously planned. It's not going to hold me back. It's not going to change who I am or change something important about me. So all these things that happen after the panic attack, critically important. It has so much to do with how you move on from the experience, how you go forward. And again, how you go forward is going to really impact the likelihood that you may have more panic attacks or that your life is going to be somehow negatively impacted by the panic. This has been a lot of information today. Thank you so much for sticking with me. And I'm hoping that you'll remember a lot of it. But if you take away one thing, if you remember just one thing, it's this. It's just anxiety. I know it feels uncomfortable, but it's just anxiety. It's a natural emotion that we experience. And this is going to be at the core of the Hello Panic program. I'm so excited to get this done today. This was a lot of work. This was a lot of information. So now I can work on the third infographic. We're going to do 4. The next one, the third infographic, will cover what makes panic attacks change into panic disorder. So if that hasn't happened yet, great. Stick with me and I'll help you to know how to prevent that from happening. If it's already happened, that's okay too, because I'll help you to reverse that process. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I'm extremely hopeful that all the information that I've provided is going to help you to get started on your journey to loosen the grip of panic in your life.